Welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, the podcast that helps you make great career decisions. My name is Mike Dickson, and I'm a professional sales and marketing recruiter. I love what I do, but my biggest frustration is seeing too many people not realizing their career potential. In this podcast, I'll introduce you to my network, an amazing group of business leaders from the biggest tier 1 organizations through to some super fast growth SMEs. They'll share their career journeys and give unique advice and insights on managing your career and leading a function and a business. Join me, Mike Dickson of AXR Recruitment and Search, to help guide your future in sales and marketing. Well, hello and welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, with me, Mike Dickson, Director of AXR Recruitment and Search. Now, our purpose at AXR is to equip you with the insights to make great career decisions. And in today's pod, we're going to dive into the career of one of Australia's best-known marketing leaders. We'll unpick his career journey, how he's managed to lead a range of diverse marketing functions from Hasbro, Bacardi, Disney, Fox Sports, WWE, yes, you heard right, that's wrestling, and now at William Grant & Sons. And with that background, he will have some great career advice for you. Welcome to the pod, Jonathan Sully. How are you?
I am very well. Great to be here, Mike.
Well, fantastic to have you. And Sully, as we'll call you, because nobody calls you by your Sunday name.
No.
Excellent. Well, let's get into it. As always, let's talk about your favorite brand. And you've worked on some stunning brands. And the caveat is you can't pick a brand you've worked on. So what's your favorite one?
I would say I look for consistency. You know, what brand have I loved for a long time? And it's Paul Smith. It's a brand that I first sort of encountered when he was young and I was a lot younger. And we've both grown up together. And I love it. I love its diversity. I love the fact it can still be contemporary. I love the fact I can wear it. Voila. And I just think it's a really interesting brand, and an eponymous brand, as we say, which I deal with a lot, you know, in whiskey. We have a lot of brands by name, and it's just beautifully done.
Love it. Well, you're looking far sharper than me, for those of you who are on our YouTube channel. I've got my, I don't know who makes our AXR T-shirts, but it's
probably
not
Paul Smith, isn't it?
No. Undoubtedly.
Yes.
Undoubtedly. Great. Now, I'm really interested in this next question because I know a bit about your background and where you're from, and it's different, right? So let's bring it to life. So where are you from?
I'm from the north of England. Yep. I channel a bit of Mark Ritson here, but without the swearing. I grew up in the north of England. I moved to Manchester. And then most of my career journey and life, therefore, has been London and abroad. So the accent you hear is probably English, but not too northern, not too London, a bit of everything. So it's a bit like the career. I've sort of gravitated through many places, through many times.
Wonderful. And I mentioned a little bit different because for those of you who are jumping on to, you know, Sully's LinkedIn profile, look, it's eclectic enough. There's a lot on there. We're going to dive into that. But, you know, I think the first business on your profile is Diageo. But let's take it back from there. Where did you actually start? What did you actually do?
I actually started as a graduate trainee at SmithKline Beecham. A really obvious role that you just slot into early days. Didn't know what I was getting into. I then found out what I was getting into, which was marketing. And it really was, I'm the accidental marketeer. It wasn't by design. I had a biology, medical background, and I went to an obvious place in a drugs company and got put on hair care. So the world of brands opened up to me, then into Diageo, which was absolutely fantastic in the early days. Working on brands, getting a love of brands, and recognizing really where the career was going to go from that point in. From Diageo to Hasbro, toys, from Hasbro to WWE, and then into media proper, as you might say, and a career journey that spanned Disney, Fox Sports, and now back into drinks. So I hate to say full circle because it sounds as though it's over. It's not over, but I have come back to drinks.
I'm sure it's not over.
I hope it's not over.
Long journey still to come. Did you have a grand plan back in the day? Did you, when you started out as a biology graduate,
Yeah.
who kind of accidentally got into marketing. Doesn't feel that that was planned. It was opportunistic.
No, it wasn't planned. The Accidental Marketeer will be the name of my podcast when I do it as well as you. I think that serendipity, that luck of falling into it, thinking I was going down a different career path is really important. That love of brands. Did I have a plan? No. But I think one of the things you learn, particularly early in your career, particularly as a marketeer, is you follow vocational interests. And I just went from brand to brand, things that I loved doing. And that built into a career. So once you've done that vocational part, then you develop more into a leadership role and you take on a broader remit. But there was no grand plan. And I think that's what I've enjoyed most, the fact that I've been able to look over different parapets and see what's interesting to me and then follow a path into them. I've been very lucky. The right things have come up at the right time. And I think you need a lot of that in your career.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's decision-making around that too.
Yes.
Some can see the opportunity, others let them go past.
Yes.
And you've clearly taken the right opportunities at the right time. So we talked about, Diageo, Hasbro, World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, isn't classic. It's off the beaten path. We've never had anybody on the podcast who's worked in wrestling.
Really? I'm surprised.
Why and how and what was that like?
To me, it's a very natural story. I was in the US looking after international marketing for Hasbro. So Hasbro at the time was just veering into entertainment, taking on Transformers, Pokemon, a lot of licenses. Star Wars, in fact, was a big part of my world back then when we were making toys. And one of the things in the US that I worked on was World Wrestling Entertainment action figures.
Right.
And it really pushed my buttons. It alerted me to the scale of this business. And the scale of that licensing business was huge within Hasbro at the time. And so once I started to think, how do I navigate my path back to Europe, which was an intent at the time, I was lucky enough to start a conversation with WWE. And there was a gentleman there called Kurt Schneider, a name that I will never forget, partly because he was a great leader, but also it's a great name. He was a square-jawed American, perfect for the name. You can already see him in terms of what he looked like. And he was the first CMO of World Wrestling Entertainment, ex-Disney, ex-Fox Sports, and he needed an international marketeer. And the remit was come into this madcap business of WWE, which is a production company at the time, nothing more, nothing less, but a very good one. Come into a production company and build brands. And we built two brands particularly well globally once I moved into that role. And I was based from the East Coast into London. So I facilitated a move, which I wanted to do. And we built two brands called Raw and SmackDown, which are still big today. But more than that, I got to see the world. And I got to see the world. It's like being in Secret Fight Club. I was touring with WWE, and one of the things that I've heard so much about in my career is storytelling. There is no one I've met, no business I've encountered, no brand I've seen that can tell stories better than World Wrestling Entertainment. The genius of what Vince McMahon, how would I call him? The leader. He's also a character on screen for anyone who does know the product. But the genius of that man to build talent. And we're talking about talent. I was lucky enough to be there at the end of Hulk Hogan, which I hope some people will know. The Rock was still there, but Batista, who went on to Bond and Guardians of the Galaxy fame. John Cena. I was on John Cena's very first tour. So aside from brand marketing, you would be literally on the bus going to markets. And you don't realize until you see it the scale of these characters in markets. So John Cena in Italy, for those people listening who don't know who he is, ask your kids. They'll probably know who he is. But John Cena in Italy was a phenomenon at the very beginning of his career. And even then, that was his first tour. You could tell that was talent that was going somewhere. And now he's a movie star. He's just like The Rock. And I think that's testament to a brilliant business in talent management, but storytelling. And that's what I meant. They attracted me because we tell stories in toys, let's say in Hasbro. Star Wars tells a brilliant story. Marvel do as well. But when you enter a production company whose sole purpose is to entertain 3 nights a week, you really understand storytelling.
Fantastic. What an insight into a very different world. I'm also intrigued by the amount of travel you were doing. So you're traveling within WWE, but from a career point of view, you kind of, I get this right, London, Boston, Sydney, Tokyo, New York, London, Sydney again. It's like, that feels like an absolute whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind. It was life-changing, career-changing, all of the above. One of the things that I think you've got to grasp is that opportunity to travel, to be in different cultures. Even at Hasbro, representing international in a very US-centric business was fascinating. So being the voice of the rest of the world, ROW, as they used to call it, that was amazing. But having the opportunity to go to India, to see brands come to life in India, to go to Japan, to work with Akabono, a sumo champion, and have a guest appearance from a sumo champion live on air is something that is a once in a lifetime opportunity. But to see all of those markets and to look at, as a marketeer, the commonalities, because you've got to somehow figure out how to sell the same thing everywhere. So you look for commonalities, you look for common threads in different languages. It's an incredible experience, and it makes you a better marketeer. It's like building professional equity as you travel more, see more. Particularly Japan, I think that's a really good one because your perspective on Japan as a foreigner is so unique. What the Japanese think is normal, you suddenly view as unusual, whether it's cultural or whether it's a pure business play. Those things are things that everyone should grasp. And it, as I said, it builds your professional equity. So for the next role, you can talk about what India is really like when you get 60,000 people turn up for a signing and a personal appearance by wrestling stars, or when you're trying to market Transformers and understand what it means in Japan. It's very different to what it means in the US.
Yeah, we get very stuck in our lane, I think. Whatever the country you're in, I've been fortunate enough to work in different countries, and we get very myopic on our immediate world, and that we put a lot of credibility in understanding that immediate world. But I'm all for contrasting experiences, and part of this podcast is to encourage people to step out of the lane and jump into very, very different worlds, whether that's functions, companies, but also geographies. Now, Sydney's now your home. You came back to Sydney. I think with Fox Sports.
I brought WWE APAC to Sydney.
Right.
And we set up an office here. And then I moved from WWE based in Sydney into Fox Sports.
Right. And was that a logical move? How did that happen?
Absolutely. Sports entertainment, just different flavors. Yeah. One's real, one's also real, let's say. Moving to Fox Sports, I grew very quickly, albeit Sydney was a base, to love what Australia represents. So to be able to work in Fox Sports, a huge scale business at the time, run by David Malone, the then MD. So it was a separate business to Foxtel. It was just a massive opportunity to really get into Australian culture. So it's almost after that eclectic, all cultures and particularly Asia, it was great to say, right, Australia's my home. I want to work on NRL. I launched an AFL channel there. So we broached a new relationship with the AFL and brought a channel to life. We had 7 channels. And one of the things that also intrigued me was you're literally selling tonight for tomorrow. When you're putting a promo on air, and at Fox Sports, I looked after the marketing and the on-air promos, that element of creativity for tonight, I'm going to sell you tomorrow's show, is amazing. And then if it doesn't go well, you also know, because you didn't get the ratings you wanted. So it's a very fast-moving business, the business of media entertainment, and particularly when you're talking about sports. So for me, it was natural, moving from one to the other, and it was also in the wheelhouse of pay TV. WWE, one of the major clients for WWE was Foxtel, as well as Channel 9. And then you move into Fox Sports and you're in the same wheelhouse, talking to the same people. So a lot of the connections, stakeholder relationships, the important things as you navigate your job, your career, your next step, they were already there.
It's interesting how we often think of FMCG being fast-moving consumer goods.
Yes.
And then you meet people from media, for instance, and it's completely different.
Yes.
There are the cadence is much more rapid than the kind of evolution of a brand over time in a commercial cycle within FMCG. So as you say, you're testing something one night for the next night's product consumption. If that doesn't work, we do it differently.
And that is, I think, I completely agree with you. I think people misinterpret fast-moving consumer goods. If you look at super fast, is that a thing? FMCG, maybe we can do that.
Create a new category, let's do it.
But to actually see, as you've just described, the effect or the lack of effect the next day from something you've done the day before is pretty incredible. Yeah. And to do that 7 days a week when you're working in some of those media areas is really interesting.
Yeah. And you, from there, jumped into consulting for a year?
Yes. The move there was really interesting. It was a point in my life where there was a big professional and personal decision to be made. And these junctures come in your life. And at that point in time, professionally, Fox Sports was moving into Foxtel. There can only be so many heads of marketing of sport when you're in Foxtel. And at the same time, my partner was returning to work and my 18-month-old was learning to walk. So I took the opportunity to take, and I put it very clearly in my own mind, I'll take February to February. And I'll take that time to spend it with my son and do some consulting. The consulting took up probably 2 or 3 days a week. The majority of time was me being a dad, which was fascinating. And having gone through that as perhaps an older parent with an 18-month-old, I've told so many people, don't miss that opportunity. You'll get another job. You'll be able to come back in professionally. But if you have that opportunity to take a life decision, and really leverage it, make the most of it, do it. Do it. You'll always have a job to go to.
Yeah, life and career are intermixed.
They should be.
We often talk about that with someone interviews with our business, a candidate. We actually unpick the life side a lot more than people expect, because that often determines the decision making you make around career, and it also creates a much more authentic experience in terms of what actually really drives somebody.
I think so, and I would encourage anyone. My team will laugh at me saying this, to pick up the airport book, Ikigai. It's a little blue book. You'll see it in the airport if you remember that name. And it's the Japanese philosophy of work and life intermixed. And it basically says, do what you love, do what you need to do what you get paid for, and do what you're good at. And if you frame your life that way, you have a really clear barometer for what you should be doing when. So I would say read Ikigai, and it's not a boring textbook either.
Ikigai, right. I'm going to get the XR team to read that, because that is our philosophy about how we try and understand the journey of the people we meet with and advise. So I love it. Okay, cool. Next was Disney.
Yes.
Everyone knows Disney.
Yes.
What does a marketer do with Disney?
What does a marketer do? Hopefully not screw it up. How about that? My remit going in was very interesting. I'd always loved Disney. I think you should have signposts in your career where you say, I want to work for them. And that was one of mine. So I had that opportunity. I went in initially with the remit to manage channels, which makes sense given my experience to date. And those are things like launching Disney XD, which housed a lot of the Star Wars content once Disney had taken on board Star Wars and Marvel. So it was a great boys channel in the days before Disney Plus, and when it was sold through other distributors. That was a primary piece of my role. Then throughout my time there, I took on the franchise role, which was quite challenging because based in Sydney, the franchise team I built was based in Melbourne. Franchise means looking after Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, and Princess, and what an absolute delight. It's all my own work, of course. None of it was. We relaunched Star Wars. We rebirthed Marvel in the guise of Disney, so it had a huge injection of pace. I lived through Monsters, Inc. in Pixar and Toy Story. So these were gifts. And the job was to manage the franchise through movie, right through to licensing, something I knew well from Hasbro days, and build a team, a new team within Disney Australia. And then finally, and this was very interesting, if you think of where it started, you think of businesses that have real disruption. And I think the media business is something people don't understand in terms of disruption. March 2015 was when a seismic piece of disruption hit Australia, and that was the launch of Netflix. Imagine you're Disney and you're selling through huge deals with Channel 7 and Foxtel and the like, and then someone comes in for $12 and says, we've got great content. And you're going, Now, we prepared for that with Disney Plus. We actually researched that in Australia, and Australia was and is a walled garden. So we were able to take a UK concept of a direct-to-consumer media property and research it in Australia. Fantastic opportunity for me to play as a very small market with the big boys in Disney and ultimately launch Disney Plus. So those were the three buckets of my time at Disney. I loved it. I still love the brand. I think it's one of the best brands in the world.
Fantastic. What an experience.
Yeah.
As you're building this eclectic career out, Sully. Then Bacardi and now William Grant & Sons. So back into liquor, the full circle, as we talked about, I'm sure more circles to come.
Let's hope it's not closed.
Yeah, exactly. So what brought you back to liquor? And we'll focus on William Grant and Sons as well, because people will know the brands, but they're probably less familiar with William Grant & Sons as a name. So perhaps just talk a bit about the business and your remit and your mandate at William Grant.
The business is a Scottish business. It's 6 generations. It was born on Christmas Day, actually, in 1887. And what it is fundamentally is a distilling business. And it's focused on whiskey, which is a fantastic place to focus. In fact, the Grant brothers, the family, were the first to launch in the 60s a single malt. So this business, William Grant & Sons, 6 generations worth, originated a category we now take as standard. There's a reason why you don't get 60-year-old whiskey. It was born in the 60s in terms of single malt. The sort of brands that are within that portfolio, you go through the big brands in whiskey, the Balvenie, the Glenfiddich, fantastic brands with such depth, in terms of aging profiles. If you think of the foresight of a business to lay down a barrel 60 years ago to be able to sell today, that's the sort of business William Grant & Sons is. Aside from that, Hendrick's, a globally renowned gin. Aside from that, there's a broader portfolio with fantastic brands like Sailor Jerry, a rum that really talks to the on-trade, as we call it, the bars, the people who work in bars, a tattoo culture. So there's a lot of diversity in the business. The reason I went back into liquor is I feel it's a really commercially sharp category. When you're working in big output deals from the likes of Disney or some of the other media brands, the deal is signed, there's a longevity to the deal, and you market your brand within that. It's very different when you're on BWS shelves and someone else is price promoting or advertising around you or doing an activation. So that I almost wanted to test my own mettle again on the commercial cutting edge of a business and get back into making real money out of effort. I know that sounds obvious. Marketeers should be doing that, but seeing cause and effect, seeing the implementation, the execution of really strong promotion have an effect on a brand. That's what I'm loving at the moment. I think that commercial acumen is something that every marketeer should develop and should pride themselves in. And if for a moment, a bit like myself, you think, oh, have I lost that edge? Get back into it. Really test your own mettle and see how sharp you are at selling stuff.
Great. It's a really interesting sector. We work for a number of liquor organizations, Sully, and there's so much proliferation. There's at every level, and
yes.
I also think with lots of smaller competitors coming into the market, there's still just the most extraordinary swings in consumer behavior from COVID coming along and where we consume, how we see brands. Just curious from your perspective. Can't ask you to be a futurist, but if you look forward, what do you think the industry is going to look like in a few years' time?
I think there'll be consolidation because there's only so much shelf space when you think of the off-trade, which is a large proportion of the business. But what I'm loving is that innovation, that return to innovation. When I was at Diageo, we launched Moscow Mule RTDs in the Alka-Pops era of Breezer. We're back. We're actually seeing innovation in format, in taste profile. We're seeing that proliferation because consumers are interested again in the category. We saw that in COVID as well, and there was a really interesting dynamic in COVID. So I think the fundamental industry of liquor, spirits particularly, is interesting again to consumers. Throughout COVID, there was a 12% increase in household expenditure on alcohol, but it premiumized, which to a company like ours, which sells high value, lower volume brands, is fantastic. So the premiumization happened. It gave companies like William Grant & Sons the opportunity to build excessive share of voice, capture people's hearts and minds with brilliant brands. Did a lot of that. And also, COVID closed the doors a bit to some international brands. I mean, supply chain were the heroes of that period, the unsung heroes in many days, but being able to just supply the market was a challenge. But what we saw is local. And I think to most people who aren't in the industry, thinking about gin would be a really resonant example. A great example is my local Dan's Big Box. Throughout 2019, 2020, when we really peaked, it was managing shelf space of 400 local gins. 400 gins, 60%, so let's say 240 were local. That's phenomenal.
Unreal. And
what it does is it builds people's interest, it keeps their interest, and it builds the market. So beacon brands, like the big brands that are represented through companies like my own, they do well.
Yeah.
So bringing more people into the market, interesting consumers, bringing them back to categories that perhaps had lapsed, like gin, it's fantastic.
Yeah. And we've talked about some real variety in terms of the organizations you've worked in, the categories. Now, I'm curious, when you come into a new role as a marketing leader, do you have like a blueprint that says, okay, I've done this before, I know what to look at, I've got a process I'm going to go through, or is it all so different, you just can't do that?
When I join a business, rather than developing my own blueprint, I look for a brief. I think one of the things that you should look for as you enter a business in a new role is the person who's hiring you, whether that be the CEO or the CMO or the direct leader. They should give you a very clear idea of what your job is. You then diagnose the situation, you develop a strategy, a vision, and you execute on it. Sometimes that changes, but I'm always looking for, okay, you want me to come into your business, we've brokered a relationship, you know what I do, what do you want? What do you really want? And then you develop that with them, in conjunction with them. You don't know a business until you're in it. So you do need that diagnosis. You may change it because that's your role, that's your expertise, that's what you're paid to do. But being able to navigate that 30, 60, 90, and I do believe in that approach to a business, and by 90 knowing, right, this is what we need to do. In answer to your question as well, I think there's more similarities than differences.
Right.
The basic principles apply. I absolutely hate the fact that marketeers chase rainbows at the moment, whether that's AI or the metaverse or whatever verse. I'm going to sound like a dinosaur, and that's wrong. I'm not a dinosaur. I'm a realist. The things that really matter are the principles. I've never gone wrong with the 4 Ps. They still apply. Whoever's inventing the next 5 Cs, stop it. It doesn't make sense. Just go back to the basic principles, and it's the application in a new scenario of the same principles, which is the real skill. If you have a very strong kit bag of marketing skills and experience, you can apply that differently. And the other bit of that, which often I think leaders miss, is leadership. It's kind of the obvious one, right? How do you take people on the journey? How do you diagnose their strengths and weaknesses? How do you help them? Rather than just coming in and wholeheartedly slicing through the marketing department and saying, I want Mike at AXR to recruit a brand new team. Sorry, Mike. You might want to just look at the capability you've got, and you might want to pull the right levers against the right messaging. So I think that's, if that makes sense, my approach from a brief to really designing the blueprint as you work in the business.
Yeah, it does. I think it's interesting, actually. I studied marketing back at uni, and presumably, therefore, Kotler's still relevant today.
Very relevant.
Yeah.
Very relevant. And what he did in those days, whether it's targeting and segmentation, the classic Kotler, look at it, read it. I tell my guys all the time, read stuff. Read Ogilvy on advertising. Understand how Rolls-Royce used to sell a Rolls-Royce with copy and a picture of a clock you could hear in a Rolls-Royce. Things like that inspire people to come into our business. We had it was a curry club with very good Hendrick's drinks, I might add, but we as a group said, let's learn more, let's build our own capability as a marketing team. And we read Lemons by Orlando Wood. If you want to know about advertising, read Lemons by Orlando Wood. Understand how the left and the right brain work. Understand how art's evolved through the ages. It's really interesting. And then build your own kit bag. That's what I would do.
Great. Now, back to you as a leader.
Yes.
Do you ever feel that you've had it working perfectly? This is the time in which me as a marketing leader, with the function I have, and the brands I'm managing, this is the optimum moment. It's often hard in the moment to realize that, but when you reflect back at times, you think, that was good.
No, I think it's a perpetual race. Let's put it that way. You're always winning and you're always losing because your competitors are doing the same thing. Those unicorn moments like Netflix launching are rare. I think more often than not, you're in that perpetual motion race. You're always trying to optimize. And I like thinking about it as levers. You're always thinking, I need to pull that one a bit harder and maybe take that one off a bit. You should never feel optimization is complete. If you looked at marketing science, it's never complete. If you talk about media, it's not complete. You can always find more or perhaps less. And optimization to me at the moment is, how do we do less more efficiently? How do we really optimize our time, energy, and resources to do a better job? So there's lots of ways to look at it, but that thought of it's perpetual motion. You will never get it perfect and right. And if you have, I don't think you're a good leader because you can't see opportunity.
Yeah, I also think there's a risk of being too comfortable. I talk to this with people who are leading for the first time or in their early stage leadership career, and they feel, right, okay, this is looking really good. And as soon as you start to feel like that, you actually start to stop challenging yourself and your team and what the future could be like and how to do it better. There has to be a natural, I like the phrase you used there about perpetual motion, but because the world doesn't stand still, everything's always moving. And if you feel you've got it done and this is it, I've ticked every box, then you're going to lose the race very quickly because other things are moving around you. So I always think, keep looking further afield, and things will go wrong and things will go right. But you've got to keep challenging yourself to think about what next.
And there is a risk as well that as a leader, you don't celebrate success. And we've always got to remind ourselves that we just did something really, really well and it worked really, really well. And let's just take a moment to actually say how well that went. Yes, we're going to optimize it and move forward. I'm a massive believer in our business and in any business in measurement and evaluation. And how do you really mark your own homework? And I think that is a really powerful thing for marketeers to have, because you can have a sensible conversation with your head of commercial and with your CFO and your CEO. And too often CMOs and marketing heads are seen as not contributing to the commercial outcome of the business. So if you can demonstrate that you're not an overhead, that you're spending money to affect change in either brand equity, which is measurable, we've got so many tools now. It's absolutely fantastic for marketeers. If you know how to use these tools and turn M&E into something that's presentable, that's understandable, that's not, I've seen some models that I don't understand. I don't know how anyone can understand them. I understand the simple stuff, and so do stakeholders, whether they be global, local, whatever. You've got to take charge of the responsibility of, you talked about optimizing, of getting results on the table and talking in that manner to C-suite executives. Because there's one thing, and I'm going to say it, I thought I'm not going to say it, and I am going to say it. Colouring in. And we've all heard it as marketeers. I stop the conversation and I say, no, that's not what we are. Sometimes I get a bit violent around the edges of the conversation, but it's our own fault as marketeers. We shoot ourselves in the foot by talking about the wrong things in the wrong context to the wrong people. Yeah. Think of who you're talking to. Take pride in the fact marketing is a science and a profession, and you need to really promote it that way.
Great advice. Really good advice. You've worked in some amazing sectors that we've covered today. Not just what's next, but have you got, Disney was a bucket list company to work in? Is there sectors or companies that in your future, because this circle's not finished, right? That you think, yeah, that's still on my to-do?
Gosh, that's a good question. You know, there's so many that I could pick off a tree. So many. I think moving into luxury as we do with really high age statement whiskies is a really, really interesting area. You know, figuring out not just what high net worth people are doing, but what people who have the propensity to spend want to do. I think that is something that I would like to unlock further, you know, and it's in my remit right now. So we do that right now. That, to me, expanding on that area, thinking of value over volume. You know, I've worked in a bit of both, a lot of volume businesses, but really understanding why people would buy that watch at that price is fascinating to me. Understanding the motivation and the value, the equity in brands. That's where marketing plays the biggest role. If you think of equity on balance sheets and you think of great companies, the luxury goods companies out there, and you think of them valuing their brands in terms of a financial number equity, that's through marketing.
Is the guy who runs LVMH now the richest person in the world?
You've got to mention LVMH in this context. It's the benchmark. You know, yes, it's a competitor, but I think they have done the most amazing job. Tiffany coming into the portfolio, what an amazing job already. But a lot of people know the story, but the way they have a creative head of the house is quite an interesting way to look at a business. So they think about creativity first and how the brand channels that creativity through its brand persona. There's no purpose and all of that behind the brands. They're just beautifully produced brands.
When I was back in Scotland many years ago, Sully, I used to recruit for Glenmorangie.
Oh, yes.
And Glenmorangie was acquired by LVMH.
It was.
And the journey they went on, and I was part of that journey from this Scottish business to be a part of this French, luxury behemoth of an organization, but becoming a maison, a house, with a creative head, as you say, was really interesting. And the view from LVMH was, this is a luxury goods business. It's not a whiskey company.
And isn't it interesting when you think, oh, well, maybe it's just fashion. Luggage, Rimowa, as they say, Rimowa, as we all call it. What an amazing example that a piece of cabin baggage can become a luxury item. And I remember the first time I ever saw one. It was in Japan, of course. They have an obsession with the brand, as they do on all things LVMH. And I stopped the guy in the lounge and I said, what's that? I need to know what that is. And the guy opened his case, can you believe it, and took me through Wow. He was so proud of the fact that he had this, aluminium, beautiful piece of work, piece of art, covered in stickers. He'd used it. It had been actually used. those are the things that I admire now. How do as marketeers, we unlock that equity and that value in brands that you could argue are somewhat similar. It's not similar to an Antler. Sorry if anyone's working on Antler.
We are moving towards the end, but such an enjoyable conversation. Now, back to your career. Are you in marketing forever? You're obviously passionate about marketing.
I'm always a marketeer. Whether I'm in marketing forever, I don't know. I haven't been in marketing throughout my career. I've been a general manager. I've done a lot of work in sales. I'm in the business of selling things, for sure. And I think as we get to the pointy end of our careers, let's say, there are less opportunities. So you've got to think, well, what does that look like? I'm always thinking about that. But I think gravitating to companies that value brands and allow you as a brand-centric business person, let's say, to do your job well, that's where I'll be. And that's where my passion is. And I can't get sick of brands, whether it be Bunnings or LVMH or any of our own brands. You know, I love Monkey Shoulder. It's a new brand, a blended 3-malt whiskey we've got. It's fantastic.
It's a very cool brand.
It's a very cool brand. And we've got to unlock these opportunities. So, and that's more than marketing.
Yeah.
You know, that's the 4 Ps as we see them properly.
Good. Now, I reckon we're going to have a lot of marketers listening to this, very keen brand managers, senior brand managers, marketing managers kind of thinking, wow, I'd like a bit of what Sully's had in terms of that career. Now, not everyone's career is different. That's the whole purpose of the podcast, is to ensure that you gather experiences that create longevity and you're always looking for something new. But in your perspective, what advice would you give those future marketing directors, those aspirational people, about how to equip themselves to make the most of their career?
And it is different for everyone. I've seen people do the very linear course within a business, you know, whether that be a Keith Weed model or a Mark Pritchard model, you know, or anything like that. And I've seen that benefit those individuals. It does depend on who you are, obviously. But I would say, from my own experience, take the risk. You know, jumping into a madcap business like World Wrestling Entertainment, I didn't know if that was a good or a bad thing. I did care, you know, I was, oh, grief, here we go. But do it, you know, and if it doesn't work out, back out, but do it. I find people who moan about money, I'll give you a really pragmatic example, and we've all met them, Mike, haven't we? I hope so. Get a job that pays more, have a go. You know, do what you think is right for you at the time and take the risk, because you won't get that time back. I learned very early on missing some opportunities that you've got to take them. They might be wrong, but you can always change direction. I think that classic, there's your career going everywhere. But the other advice, as well as taking the risk and the opportunity, is follow the heartbeat a bit more. You know, I said, yeah, follow the money, but that's only going to last until you want the next pay rise. Follow things that, when you're younger, vocationally entice you and interest you. And then as you grow your career, if it's leadership, follow career paths that give you the opportunity to really develop that. So yes, have a career plan, but keep moving. Keep curious, you know, as everyone says, but really ask yourself the questions first. Where am I going to be happiest? Where can I get paid? The Ikigai model. What do I need to do? And what do I love to do? If you kind of hang on to those things, you find yourself in the right place. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Sully. Really enjoyed this conversation.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Mike.
We've covered a lot, and we could talk further. If it was the afternoon, we should retire to the bar. But it's we're recording in the morning, so we can't do that. Guys, thanks to you for listening as well. If Sully's stories inspired you, if you'd like to re-examine your career goals, there's some books we've given you to read there for starters, but reach out to any of my team or myself directly at AXR Recruitment and Search. We'd love to help you shape your future. Now, coming up in the pod, we've got an HR special with the HR leaders Nellie Tierney of Campari and your very own Karen Coyle from William Grant Sully. Coming up very soon. We're going to take a look at the HR perspective and how you'll get the most out of your career working with HR. And I think it'll be some great piece of advice from those guys. They're both highly energetic, so it should be a bit of fun as well. Thanks again, Sully.
Thank you.
And from me, Mike Dickson, keep listening to our podcast to help your future in sales and marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's top sales and marketing leaders. You just can't get this career advice anywhere else. My name is Mike Dickson. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.